Welcome to the latest episode, ladies and gentlemen.
Yay!
New Mondays in MMORPGs. Today is going to be a somewhat heavier topic. Um,
Oh, yes.
I'm still a little crunky in my congestion, but I am feeling better, which is a plus. Um, we're going to talk about gaming addiction today, and I think we should preface this by saying that there are lots of different ways to look at this.
Hmm.
There is not a general consensus worldwide. There is not an international agreement on what is gaming addiction. There is a few select groups who have taken it upon themselves to declare gaming addiction as a lifestyle issue in the same vein as gambling addiction and alcoholism and other things, but there's still a lot of research that has to be done, and there's a lot of gray area. So we're going to talk about a lot of that because there's on the one hand hardcore addiction, but then on the other hand there's escapism, which is not the same thing as addiction, and then there's also the pursuit of a hobby, which for some people is something that they pursue on a daily basis, and that isn't an addiction at all, but when
But
viewed
it can look
it
as
can
one.
look. That's the thing. Viewed from
Yeah.
an outside, uninformed point of view, it can look like addiction. So let's dive into this. I've got an article up. So I'm going to read some stuff very quickly, and then we'll kind of dive into discussion topics. So, um, for those of you who want, I know some people don't like to pull from the Wikipedia. I do. It's got lots of source material. You can go back and view sources and citations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Video game addiction, which is also known as gaming disorder or internet gaming disorder, is generally defined as a problematic, compulsive use of video games that results in a significant impairment to an individual's ability to function in various life domains over a prolonged period of time. This and associated concepts have been the subject of considerable research, debate, and discussion among experts in several disciplines and generated controversy within the medical, scientific, and gaming communities. Such disorders can be diagnosed when an individual engages in gaming activities at the cost of fulfilling daily responsibilities or pursuing other interests without regard for the negative consequences. The World Health Organization included gaming disorder in the 11th revision of its International Statistical Classification of Diseases. The American Psychiatric Association, while stating that there is insufficient evidence for the inclusion of internet gaming disorder in their Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in 2013, nevertheless considered it worthy of further study. Um, the most important thing to take away from this is that when we're talking about gaming addiction or gaming disorder, we're talking about something where the individual has a compulsive use of video games in such a manner that it impacts negatively their ability to function in various aspects of their lives. So there's a big difference between, say, someone playing every single night with their spouse or their kids or their friends. Big difference between that, and that person is maintaining a day job. They come home from work, they log in to play. That's their social activity. Other people watch Netflix, other people have bowling leagues, some people go run at the park. There's a difference between that and someone who games to the point where they stop showering, they stop caring about anything outside of the game. They don't want to go to work. They break up with their significant other because of the video game. These are things, that's a big difference between that
Hmm.
and someone who is playing on a regular basis. There's also some really interesting information in terms of in the final draft versions of the document that I mentioned earlier. The gaming disorder was included alongside gambling disorder under disorders due to addictive behaviors. The addiction defines as a pattern of persistent or recurrent behavior defined by three criteria: the lack of control over playing video games, priority given to video games over other interests, and the inability to stop playing video games even after being affected by negative consequences. And for gaming order, disorder to be diagnosed, the behavior pattern must be of sufficient severity to result in significant impairment of personal, family, social, educational, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, and traditionally needs to be evident for at least 12 months. So there are some very broad guidelines about how these companies have defined what is a gaming disorder. It's all good.
Ok. Je suis en enregistrement, s'il vous plaît. Soyez absolument silencieux, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
So, as a general rule, the classification for a gaming addiction or a gaming disorder is someone who plays to the detriment of their life. That is not the same thing as escapism, nor is it the same thing as pursuit of a hobby, but I think it can be difficult to define those things. So I'll give a little background on myself, and then I'll let you talk about it from your perspective, Ella.
Okay.
So, having
But
been. Mhm.
before we speak about ourselves, I really would like to speak more about what an addiction is in general,
Sure,
because I
go for
think
it.
it's important. We're just speaking about what gaming addiction is, but what is an addiction? And the document I am getting my information is a video created by Tilswan. Tilswan is a very controversial spiritual guru, whatever. But her video is extremely interesting, and I will suggest to any one of you, if you're interested by the subject, to check out with a very open mind, and don't think about the other stuff she's saying, but really focuses on this video about addiction. Basically, she reminds us that addiction are a natural behavior, which is a coping mechanism, defense system put in place when you are wounded. You're wounded emotionally, sometimes in your childhood, and this wound will cause you to compensate in some way for your own survival. And it's one of the only way we are doing it, and this can lead to any sort of addiction. And we are all addicted. The only thing is that you have addiction that looks very bad, that are really badly judged, like alcoholism, drugs, sex, porno, video games, all that, it's ugly. But someone which is addicted to meditation, to yoga, to work, to sport, no one will say anything because it looks like a healthy behavior. The thing is that in both cases, in any way, it's the compensation of a wound. And the compensation of a wound is nothing bad. It's just something that we are doing because life is hard, life is tough, and this is one way of surviving, one way of providing ourselves something to cope, a situation which is really, really tough.
I think if you classified it that way, then any sort of hobby could be defined as an addiction because everybody has a pursuit that they like whether it's painting, it could be reading a book, it could be playing the guitar. And if that's something that someone does on a daily basis to the exclusion of other things, then you could, like you said, you can automatically define that
Yeah.
as an addiction.
The addiction is simply the fact of coping something else, a wound, emotional wound of some sort, by whatever. It doesn't matter, whatever. Of course, when you're doing something easy, which will also give you a physical addiction, which is something different, like drugs or alcohol, you have, in addition of the psychological addiction, you have the physical one. It's more complicated, but drawing or reading or walking in the park can be an addiction if you feel the need of doing it, and if you're doing it to compensate something you're not facing, which is an old wound. So the way of dealing with addiction, according to Teal's one in that video, and this is something I find so true, it's not so much to blame yourself because you're addicted to something, but really make the journey within yourself to find out what is the wound that's causing it, what is the lack, what is these things you're protecting yourself by this behavior.
Yep. Sorry, I'm just writing down a note because I need to get the link to that video from you so I can put it in our YouTube description later on and for the Patreon readers. Okay. So we have a very loose definition of addiction by this individual that you're speaking of, and then we have the classification of addiction by the World Health Organization, excuse me. Um, and on the one hand, we have a philosophical discussion about what is an addiction, and I think we can all agree that there are lots of different forms of addiction to cover, whether it's personal traumas or evading the real world and escaping from responsibilities or using it as an outlet to relax yourself and get away from work, or people who become addicted to fitness because previously they were addicted to drugs, for example. There's actually quite a few examples of in celebrity environments where you have a rock star or an actor or something where they've previously been really addicted to hard drugs and finally found exercise. And then if you look at the way they treat exercise as it's an addiction for them. Like if they don't, that's how they keep themselves from doing the drugs. But the way they pursue the exercise is it with the same manic level of addiction. Um,
Exactly.
and that's something where they're definitely it's as you mentioned, that's something that's being used to cover up some sort of past wound or past issue. I but apart from that, I want to talk a little bit about um, escapism for a moment. Let's talk about escapism, and then we can talk about the
Hmm.
hobby aspect because so I've been in both of those camps. Where I am at right now in my life, and where I've been for easily the last 15, 20 years or so. Um, I play video games as it is my primary passion in life. It is the hobby that I pursue, not to the exclusion of other hobbies, but it is the hobby that I have pursued for 20 years um, with the most dedication. This is something where I have always played video games, whether it's consoles or PC games. I have played MMORPGs since the mid 90s. I've played, I've had every generation of console except for what is it, the PS2 and whatever the Xbox version was around that time. Those were the two that I didn't have because I was traveling a lot. Oh, and the PS2, I guess the PS3. I didn't have PS2 or PS3 because I was traveling so much. But um, now I have a PS4 and I'll be getting a PS5 and et cetera, et cetera. So gaming, suffice to say, gaming has been a big part of my life for a very long time. And it's definitely something that I pursue as a hobby. And for the past 6 years, I've also been pursuing it as a career. Um, and it's interesting because I have a spouse who does not game more than maybe once a month, and the only reason she games once a month is because of me. If I was not a gamer, she wouldn't care. But because she knows that that's my thing, she actually, has become interested in it enough. I mentioned this before. She's played World of Warcraft Classic with me off and on for the past couple months. The Nathan Drake collection was free this month with PS Plus. She has been like, I don't play that without her. She sits on the couch. I've actually got some video that I recorded the other day that's quite hilarious because she's on the couch freaking out because stuff's coming at me. There's bad guys, and she's yelling at me, "Get the gun, get the ammo! Come on, there's a guy over there, Jordan! Ah, look at
Uh,
ah!" And she's like, she's really getting into it, even though she's not playing it. So it's interesting for me because I have a spouse who's not into it as much as I am, but still enjoys it from time to time. That also allows me to pursue lots of interests. And if you go back 20 years ago, we didn't have Netflix, and we've talked about this before on the show. We didn't have all these other things, and I like all of these other things. So I'm able to do all of these other things as well as video games. Video games are definitely a hobby for me, but they are something that I pursue on a regular basis. I play 4 to 5 nights a week um, as a general rule, and I'll usually play for about 2 hours, maybe 3 hours per session um, when I play. So I'll put in a good 15, 20 hours a week into video games. However, I went to Paris in October of last year for a photo shoot. Didn't play at all for 15 days. Not once during that 15-day trip did I have any sort of, you know, twitchy shakes or, oh, I need to log in, I need my video game. There was none of that. It was just, I'm taking a 2 week break. I'm going off and doing photography, and when I come back, the video game will still be there, and it's not like it's going somewhere. So it's just for me where I am in my life right now. It's definitely just a hobby, although I pursue it from on a daily basis. And if you ask my parents, who are in their late 50s, they will say that I'm addicted because they look at video games. They've always perceived video games in a negative light. Um, and even when, a decade ago, when I first started getting going in my writing career, it's been more than a decade now. Like the very first job that I got as a writer was writing game guides for EverQuest 2 for a website called GamerGod, and then went on to do guidebooks for killer guides for Lord of the Rings Online and EverQuest 2. Those were my first two paying jobs as a writer that I got because I was into gaming. And that was also when esports was starting to become a big thing, and people were playing Halo tournaments and earning $1 million paychecks and getting like $3 million in sponsorships. And this is before Twitch and, streaming and all that other stuff, but it was becoming a big thing. And I remember at the time, I remember talking to my parents one time and kind of saying, isn't it ironic that you can make a living now playing video games, and you always said that video games are a waste of time and just rot your brain. And my dad was like, I just don't understand how, yeah, blah, blah, blah. He just doesn't want to talk about it because he doesn't grasp it. My dad is a, this may sound negative, but it's just the way it is. He's a rancher. He is in every essence like the last generation of what you would call a cowboy. Um, he's literally ridden horses to the point where he can't ride horses anymore because his body's so broken. He's like 57, but he's like 75 because the ranch life does that to you if you let it.
Mm.
And but my parents view video games as a negative thing, and they still can't wrap their head around the fact that we're building a video game and that we have like the idea of us selling pre-orders for something that doesn't physically exist. it His mind cannot, he just can't get it. He doesn't understand it because to him,
Mhm.
if he can't touch it, and if he can't go to the store and put his hands on it right now, then he's not going to give someone money for it. Because why would I give you money for something that A, doesn't exist yet, and B, isn't even a physical product? Like those things are just, he can't fathom those things. So when they look at me playing video games every night, um, it's it's one of those things where they can't grasp it. Now, in the same token, when we went to visit the family last month in December, we were there for the whole month. And when I got there, my brother still didn't have internet at his house yet, um, because they had just moved in and they had to cut trees down and all this other stuff. And they still had, but we had internet at my parents' house at the main ranch house. So we were staying at my brother's house, and we went over to dinner one night at my parents' house, and I hadn't had access to the internet for like 5 days. And so, of course, I've got Stormhaven Studios going on. I've got Saga Leucemia going on. Um, so, forgetting World of Warcraft Classic or anything like that, I had had 5 days without internet. And we show up at the house, and I'm immediately like on my phone, and I've got like 500 notifications that I've got to go through. And he's getting upset because we're sitting around after dinner and I'm on my phone and I'm going through my phone. And so is my sister-in-law, who also works online for a living. And since they didn't have internet at their house, she was there checking her emails and everything. And my dad was making a scene about how we were addicted to our phones and we were addicted to the internet and we couldn't put down our phones for 5 minutes to have a conversation with the family. And it's like, hang on a second, that's not true. We've been disconnected for like a week, and now we have to catch up, and we just happen to be here, and now our phones are going off the hook because of all the notifications, and we have to take care of business. And then there was a conversation a week later where he was getting upset because we were, both of us, myself and my sister-in-law, were um, going off about the importance of the internet for our day jobs. And he said, "Well, just get a satellite connection. You'll be good to go." And it's like, I don't think you understand what working online is. Like a satellite connection does not cut it in the 21st century. Like I need a constant, steady data stream. I can't have lag. I can't have data caps. Satellite. at least in the US, it's slow by modern standards, and you're usually capped at like 20 gigs a month, and then they slow you down to dial-up speeds. And it's like, I'm sorry, I'll use 20 gigs on a slow day at my home office here, you know? So it's like I don't think you quite understand what working online is, because when I'm producing videos for the Saga of Lucemia and I'm producing this podcast show, the vodcast version, you know, by the time I get done recording this, this might be a 3.5 gig, 4 gig file, you know, that has to get uploaded. And then we do the podcast version. And then like recently I've been, you know, we're doing photos for Saga Lucemia, and I got to do videos for Saga Lucemia. I have another client that I work with. You know, 20 gigs is a slow day for me. Um, so I think there's this misperception from outsiders who don't quite understand what it is to A, work online for a living, and B, have a hobby that revolves around the internet. They view that as a negative thing. It's like, oh, you're spending all your time online. You're not in the real world, therefore you're addicted. And it's like, I'm not addicted. It's just my life is the internet. It's like for someone like him, for example, he can't do his job without a tractor and diesel fuel and horses and dogs. You know, those are his tools of the trade. And I can't do my job without internet, cell phones, and etc. So I think from an outsider standpoint, um, it can be difficult to understand what is a online hobby like gaming, because they view it as an addiction. I don't know, you have kids, so maybe you can give me
Yeah.
some insight. I don't know if you've ever, because you're a gamer, so I don't know if you've ever like given your kids time limits or controlled
Well,
their online activities. Maybe you can give us some insight on that.
yes. Um, but before we go, I would like to underline something because Tim is talking a long time. Like
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
15 minutes is
yeah,
talking, and during
yeah.
this time, I have plenty of ideas. Oh yeah, I want to say that. I want to say, but I'm polite and I'm not interrupting. I'm letting him go
Save
until
it.
the end. All right. So first of all, what I think is very important to underline is that addiction or not something wrong. We all have them. We all have them. And this is something really important because why will you look down to someone which has addiction while you have them too? Are we looking down to people because they're pooping? No, pooping is dirty, all right, but we are all doing it and it's
There's a
part
good
of the
kids book.
natural things of things.
Everybody poops.
So addiction is a defense system. And while they are not always healthy, or while they are never healthy because they are hiding a wound and it's a signal that you have some psychological work to do or philosophical work or spiritual work to do, whatever. But it's something natural. Therefore, let's drop all of us watching this video. Let's drop the judgment over people that are addicted. It doesn't matter if it's heroin, meth, alcohol, sport, meditation, yoga. Doesn't matter. It's the same thing. And the way to help people is certainly not judging them. It's certainly not being despiteful, and it's certainly not to them, looking down to them like you're better because you're not doing. We're all the same. We're all pooping, and we all have addiction. Now, related to my children, the thing is with gaming, I have used it as an addiction. I've been addicted until recently, actually. And the reason why I have been addicted to video game is simply a very big escapism in my way. It was so much easier to be creative, to be the person I wanted to be, to organize things, to have a feeling, to have a sort of impact, control in a virtual environment. So my addiction is not really just video games. Or we can say the whole things around it. So the whole internet, gaming community, all the business over there, not just the game itself. But this has been an addiction because it was my world. It was my kingdom. It was a place where I felt like I could build up something that will be productive for myself, where I could express my talents, and where I just could be who I wanted to be a lot easier than in reality, where it was not exactly. For a very long time I've been extremely depressed by the world and reality and or time or epoch or civilization and all that kind of things. I will not enter into that debate too.
Yeah,
Anyway, so
because
that has been my reason of disappearing into the internet where life was better because I could build it for myself. The reason why I have dropped and I consider it not as an addiction anymore, and I don't really know how it happened. I always work a lot on myself, exploring who I am and dig up old wounds and trying to heal them. And I have plenty of way of doing this. And I went to a very big existential crisis last year, and after that, the addiction part was dropping, which is cool because it's not an addiction anymore. But which is not cool is that it was a lifestyle that were, oh, okay, when you're in the video game industry, more time you can spend it, the better, because you can always build up more relationship. You can always, master your skill better. You can always be more informed because internet is infinite, and you have an infinite of skill to learn, an infinite of people to meet, and an infinite of ideas to have and stuff to create, and so it's endless. um, but yeah, so now I'm more busy with real life stuff, and when I'm done with my work day and my stream, and as much passionate I am about it, I'm really enjoying to do something which is not that at all. While before, when I was addicted, I really needed it. I felt like my life has no sense outside of it.
yeah, I was gonna say. So I mentioned at the beginning of my 15-minute rant. Um, the last 10, 15 years or so, I haven't really been in that position. But I can say that during my late teens into my mid 20s, maybe even into my towards the mid to late 20s, um, when I will consider the time when I was running our top 10 worldwide raid guild. That was a 7-year stretch alongside my ex-partner. That was when I was literally playing, 100 hours a week. We were running a top end raid guild, and outside of work and her school, that's all we did. That's literally all we did. And from my perspective, like from where I was in my life, um, this was the time when I was working for the family business in ceramic tile and natural stone as a third generation contractor, and I fucking hated every single second of that job. Um, I'm not going to get into the life circumstances that led me to that point, but basically from the time I was 16, I started working full time, had to pay rent, had to pay car payment, I got, wasn't living at home, and I had to do something, and that was the only thing I knew. And this was pre-internet, so pre-social media, pre, the ability to make a career for yourself using the internet. This was still very much, mid 90s was the beginning of that, and the only recourse I had was to go into the family business because that was what I knew from growing up in it. But I hated it every single second of it, and I absolutely 100% used video games as an escape from the hell that was my real life. I hated every second of my time in that career. And so for me, it was that release. It was that, I'm going to come home from work, and the moment I'm done, I'm showered, I've eaten, and I'm in the game, and I'm in EverQuest, and and then EverQuest 2 and so on and so forth. But I was in those virtual worlds, being able to literally shed, you know, forget all of this crap going on back here and focus on the things that were allowing me to have fun and the relationships that provided me joy and laughter.
Mhm.
Um, Now, I think it's important to take a step back from that and say that you can definitely consider that to be an addiction in the sense that I was using it as an escape tool for to cover up the pain, which is no different than an
Mhm.
alcoholic, excuse me, who drinks to numb the pain, or someone who's addicted to heroin and uses heroin to numb the pain. No different whatsoever. Um, Now, in the grand scope of things, it's a healthier addiction because you're not destroying your physical health. Um, And at the end of the day, I never got so deep into it that I lost perspective of, hey, I still need to pay bills, I still need to eat, I still need to, go to work and put money in the savings account and plan for the future. Like I never lost track of that. And I think we talked about earlier last week briefly when we were deciding to talk about this
Mhm.
topic. I had a person that I knew when we were playing EverQuest who um, quit going to school, got kicked out of university, lost his girlfriend, lost his house, ended up back at his parents' house because he just completely went off the deep end and, was playing way more than I was playing and just didn't care about the real world. And I think that's the kind of, we've all seen the guy, the homeless man on the street who's just drunk out of his mind and he smells like shit because he hasn't had a shower in, 2 years. And he's living on the street corner because something in his life went so bad and he allowed that alcohol to take control of his life and put him on the street. And that individual that I knew was doing the same thing with video games. The difference between I think alcoholism and video games is that it's not as easy to, you can't play a video game when you're living on the street. You can still get alcohol when you're living on the street, but you need an internet connection and so on and so forth. But I don't think there's any distinction between when you're using video game as an escapism tool to get rid of trauma or to avoid issues. That's when there's that danger threshold. And I think that's what like the World Health Organization looks at is they look at the extreme cases of it's ironic if you really read through all the documentation, they really start to talk about the people who play for like 12 hours a day. And I look at that and I go, hang on a second, because technically that's every fucking streamer that's that's
Yeah, yeah.
ever that's ever made a career over the past 5 years. They're all
But
playing more than 12 hours a day. And if the classification for an addiction is going to be someone who puts in at least 12 hours a day into something, I don't necessarily agree with that characterization
me neither.
because I do lots of things. I work on a video game for 12 hours a day, building this virtual world. Am I an addict because I work on the Saga Lucimi for 12 hours a day? It's just my job.
Yeah.
So I think there are distinctions.
Yeah, I believe that it's the reason why you're using it. If you're like, oh my god, this game is so much fun, I am playing my, head off, like it's the new release of a new expansion, and you're the whole week and you do crazy, like you play 16 hours a day, which is really crazy for a week. It can be insane, but it's the same way that the guy which is like once every month is going to do a super big party, is like wasting himself completely with a lot of alcohol, and that's fine because it's punctual, it's really done because you enjoy it, because you want to have fun, because it make you feel happy, feel good about it. It has nothing to do with, as extreme as it is, it has nothing to do with an addiction. It's become dangerous when you're you are getting away from something else and you're compensating, and you somewhere somehow, and very much people that are really addicted to something, they will deny it. That's the first thing. No, I'm fine, I
Well,
can stop when I want.
I'll be
I'm,
I'll be the first to say that I'm technically not addicted right now. I can stop anytime I want.
yeah,
I went to Paris
me
for two
too.
weeks. I was fine. I went to the United States for a month. I was fine. I think there are edge cases for that though. What you're saying.
I only start at 5. I remember very well when I was addicted to weed, which was something different, that I was using the same argument that when I was playing World of Warcraft. No, but I'm fine. Yeah, just one day without World of Warcraft, no problem. I only start late in the evening. During the day, I do what I must do.
So I'm
You,
also
you
gonna
see, because you're defensive,
I,
you feel inside of you. You're like defensive. You
so
need
I'm
to
gonna I'm gonna
justify.
jump in here real quick because I have been a major proponent for legalization of marijuana for many many years. Um, I don't smoke it frequently anymore. Um, but up until probably 2 years ago, daily. I often joke when we were giving presentations that every book I've ever written including my bestseller books with the travel blog. Every single book I've ever written, I was high on weed. Like just that's just a it's one of those things. I grew up in Colorado. It was not a big deal. They were the first state to legalize it in the United States. Um, I've never viewed that as something addictive, and this is an interesting conversation since you brought it up because I had to prove to my wife because she came from the perspective of a religious background where weed is just bad because it's one of those things that they teach you is bad. And so when she met me, she didn't know that I partook on a regular basis. And we started dating, and then we got really serious. And then it wasn't, I think, until she started, regularly spending time at my house. And I still kind of kept it under the radar for a couple of years. And then I remember one time I had smoked half a joint, with breakfast, and I had like not cleaned up a little bit of the ash on the kitchen table, and she came over a couple hours later and like immediately saw the ash and had like this rant about, and so we had to have this big discussion about it. And as we've been together 9 years now. We were talking about this earlier, our time together. um, Probably 5 years ago, um, she was convinced finally by the merit of us running our Airbnb property in Cancun, and like every week, 3, 4 people coming through who talked about how they smoked infrequently and it was not a big deal. And it just kind of got her to the point where she began to realize that, oh, maybe it's not this addictive thing that I've been taught it is. It just depends on the person. And I went, oh, so now you understand. It has like you and I, like not you, Ella, but my wife and I, we're both the
Yeah.
type of people we can have a beer and it's just a beer. I can have one beer, I can have 2 beers, not a big deal. I can have a glass of wine. I regularly have a glass of wine. I can have, a martini, 1 or 2 martinis, and I'm fine. But there are people who cannot have one beer. They have to have 20 beers. They have to drink until they pass out or they vomit. There are people who have
Or
these personalities.
they will have just 2 beer, but every single day. And if they don't, they're bad. And
Yes,
that's also
yes.
alcoholism.
So on that
It's the
note,
regular.
I've watched my wife over the course of 9 years. She'll probably kill me for saying this, but she has partaken on occasion of the plant, and it has been something where once she did that and she realized that, oh, it's not this addictive thing. It's just something that every once in a while it might be nice to kick back and relax. And I think that if you use it like that, that's fine. But there are people, like with any other thing, who have that personality who will abuse it
Yeah.
and become addicted to it. Because from a psychoactive analysis of the plant properties, there's nothing addictive about that plant. However, the personality of an individual, if they have a need to cover up something, absolutely. And that's where we get back to the gaming discussion on the personality of an individual often will dictate, not often, will always dictate whether or not the game is something that becomes an addiction or just a hobby. I'm not addicted. I can quit anytime I want.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me about World of Warcraft Classic. I don't know what you're talking about.
And related to marijuana and whatever, we need to remember also that you have tobacco in it generally. Usually, that's what people does, and that creates physical addiction.
It can.
So
I also
there's
smoked cigarettes
that.
for years, so I'm fully aware of addictive things.
Yeah,
I had
we
congestive lung
both are.
failure. Yeah, I had
It
congestive lung failure when I was 20, the night of my 22nd birthday. And that's when I quit smoking cigarettes because it was just, that was not the result of cigarettes, but it was the result of cigarettes on top of huffing concrete dust without a mask and everything else for
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
years. And my doctor was like, look, man, you got to make some lifestyle changes. So don't smoke cigarettes anymore,
yeah,
which is a
which
good
is
thing.
good. And yeah.
I still smoke cigars once in a while,
So
but that's a little different.
so if you're addicted or feel addicted to video game, or if you know someone addicted to video game, what to do? Well, the first things is I think, and very important, and that's my beliefs, is to not have judgment or prejudice and being loving towards yourself, if it's yourself, and remove yourself as much as you can the feeling of guilt and shame, and just say, okay, I have a problem, that's all right, I'm going to deal with it, it's fine, and seek to better yourself instead of cutting the addiction. I think that's the best way to do, instead of like controlling yourself from the outside, which you can do very easily. You throw off your computer or whatever, you cut internet, but it's not needed because
It's
the
not. I think that's very important. I got to jump in real quick. I think it's very important for people to understand that, there is a time and a place. Like, getting over a loved one's death or getting over a breakup. I mean, these are good examples of when you're going to want to dive into something to distract you from the grief, the pain, the loss. And it might be Netflix, it might be, a book series, it might be, going off and we met a girl one time who had a really bad relationship end, and she decided to take her bike and go on a 6-month road trip, and she took her bike and she rode her bike from Alaska all the way down to Colombia all by herself as a mid-20s girl from Germany, and just did this epic like 6-month bike ride where she was just basically camping and backpacking her way through. And that was, she just cut herself off from everything and everybody, and then went back to Germany when she was finished and resumed her life. It was like it was this temporary thing, and I think that's okay. It's when it becomes more permanent is when we have
yeah,
to worry
when
about it.
you start to sink into it.
Yeah,
But like I say, it's not controlling the outside, it's not controlling the addiction itself, it's not controlling your game, or that's a temporary, it's like a band-aid, it's a temporary solution. The real solution is to find what's causing the addiction and dealing with that. Or if you cannot do that, then replace some gaming time by something else. You're just like to even out and find a certain degree of balance
that's
if
where
that's what you need.
I love the modern era we live in for that because we talked about this. I've mentioned this briefly. I love streaming services these days. Like there is such an abundance of high quality entertainment material out there in the form of whether it's Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, Sci-Fi. Like there's just like The Mandalorian or The Witcher or Game of Thrones. I mean, there's all these amazing television shows as well as amazing books behind these television shows. And I think that's where I'm happy that Chris is not a gamer because my previous partner being a gamer meant that I didn't ever have a reason to do something outside of the game.
Yes.
And since Chris likes to do other things, then it's, I'm always in the back of my mind, it's always like, okay, I don't want to put more than a few hours a day into the video games because I need to spend time with her, and that time is going to be going to the park, um, working on helping her with her English classes because she's doing all her exams to get her teacher's certification, excuse me. Um, we travel. I mean, not as much as we used to because we had the travel blog for like 10 years. So we don't do that anymore as frequently, but we still do travel stuff. Um, exercise is important for us, especially as we're getting older. So we try to go out, 4 or 5 times a week and do stuff physically together, like going to the park and jogging and etc. We like to go out and do anytime there's events. And we live in the big city, so we live in Mexico City. So it's like whenever it's summertime, there's something happening somewhere in the city, like every weekend, like at the parks. There'd be like a food festival or a arts and craft festival and we do all that stuff. So that's where I like having that balance in my adult life of saying,
Mm-hmm.
you know what, my career is video games now. I definitely still have maintained video games as my primary hobby in life, but I have lots of other things I do which keep me balanced. Um, I would say that knowing myself um, and where I came from, you know, if I was by myself, it would probably be a different story.
Yeah.
I would probably be playing a lot more than I do.
Yeah.
So that's something that I always kind of keep in the back of my mind is like it's probably a really good thing that I have a good partner in life who is you know, keeping me balanced. And I think that's a whole nother topic entirely, but I think that's one of those things where I think it can be a really good thing to find a partner that is the opposite, so to speak, because they keep you, it's pros and cons. I mean, like, I've been in a relationship with someone who was my exact copy, and that was a great relationship, but at the same time, that's all we ever did was video games. And
Mm-hmm.
this is a different scenario where our shared passions are like travel, photography, food, um, science fiction, fantasy type stuff. So there's still that shared enjoyment of certain things, but there's enough difference going on where it's like, she likes to paint. I have no desire to paint. I'm not a visual artist. So that's her thing, and
Mm-hmm.
and she likes country music, which for me, I'm not a big fan of country music, but some of it I like, but so that's her thing. And then like she doesn't like if I'm listening to Tool or Ministry or some weird industrial hardcore music, she doesn't like my kind of music when I'm listening to that stuff. But then if I'm listening to like Jethro Tull or some folk instrumentals or Bob Dylan or something, she likes that. So it's a balance of things that we like and share and things that we don't share. And I think that's a good thing. For me, from a personal perspective, I think it's good to have someone in your life who can keep you balanced. Anyway,
I think it's also important to say that um, video game is something that can take a lot of space in your mind because it's something that can keep you very mentally busy. You can think either all the cool story you're doing or what is the build I'm going to do, or I need to organize my guild. And you can be extremely busy because it's a very intense life where you don't have just the video game to play through, and that's enough to keep you very, very busy. But then there's everything around, like the social place that you have in your group of friends, how to organize an event, what gear you need to have to do the next raid, or what you need to catch up, or which new alt you want to play, or will you continue to play this game, or you don't like the developers anymore so you want to change, and all those things that keep you extremely busy. You need space in your mind to reflect about yourself. And I think this is something important for personal growth. You need to have some moment of silence. And the video games can keep you as busy as someone which is always on drug. So is always high, is always drunk, or you're always busy with video gaming stories in your mind. And sometimes you need silence, you need space so something else can happen in your mind. And this is something very important. And I don't think we talk a lot about that aspect.
no, I think there's something to be said if you read through the documentation on the World Health Organization's classification of gaming addiction and gaming disorder. That's one of the things they talk about is the way that like the free to play market in particular has come to dominate the minds of many people because it's related to the psychological aspect of how microtransactions work is all based on the dopamine hit
Oh,
and
yeah,
from a
yeah.
marketing standpoint what the companies are doing is they're designing these systems so that the player is constantly being just hit with this flood of dopamine feel good. I'm getting free shit like, oh yeah, this is awesome. And if you're constantly being given that feeling, that's what is very similar to say shooting up heroin or something where or getting drunk and having that euphoria of feeling important and feeling, you know, that that high. And that's something you can get in a lot of different places. And I think this is where I'm gonna come back to relationships again. Not everyone is in relationships, but I think that this is where being in a good relationship is something that can help in that sense because if you have someone in your life who appreciates who you are, and enjoys being with you and you're doing those things together, there you get the same thing from that person, and that's a good thing. It's definitely it's one of those things that going back to how it helps you be balanced in life. I'm also one of those people who's I don't like to be I've never liked to be alone, and I know some people like to be loners. I'm not one of those people. I'm definitely a needy, romantic, poetry. I've played the writer card many years.
You know that that relationship can also be a form of addiction,
Yeah, not gonna
affective
lie,
addiction.
it's,
So
it's, it's a good thing. But
it's hiding everywhere.
that dopamine hit, that constant feeding, drip line of addictive properties thing. That's one of those things that they really focus on with their classification when they're talking about the
Hmm.
free to play market and the microtransactions. And I think for the most part, the player base on a global level understands that, which is why there's this kind of unspoken hatred of microtransactions. Even though we all know they work, we all know that the system is designed in such a
Yeah.
way that it is an
And
effective monetization strategy. We all know it. Um,
I think this is one of those things, like government continuing to selling cigarettes because
there's
it's
profit.
good for their tax and for their whatever, and it's it's really obvious that it's just shit for everyone. I'm not
It's
apologizing to smokers. I'm not judging you, but you know it's shit.
Yeah. I
It's
think
really bad.
everybody who smokes, at least all of the friends that I have who still smoke even today, they all admit that they know it's a
Yeah.
nasty, addictive, deadly habit, but they do
Well,
it because they can't stop, and it's
it will be simple for the government to cut it entirely if
yes.
it was they wanted.
Yes.
And in the same way, for developers to, and I'm not speaking developers, but companies to absolutely build a whole system on the addiction on people is dirty. It's really dirty. I don't like it. I think it's evil. I
We
think this is the
actually
kind of things you should not do.
this is
And
a
I'm really glad that Saga of Leusemia is staying ethic and we shall not do this kind of
no, we're
shit.
doing monthly subscriptions and or optional monthly subscriptions. But it's an interesting thing because we actually had an investor who we were discussing things with recently, an investment group actually, for a big chunk of change. And that's one of the things they actually asked us about because they're an investment group they've never done any investing with a gaming company before. And they have a group of individuals. They're made up of a group of individuals who are definitely of the boomer generation, so they're in their 50s and
Hmm.
beyond. And one of the things that got brought up during a conversation was whether or not we would be implementing a time limit in our game. Like you play for set amount of time and then the game will like kick you out. And I was like,
No.
I don't think we will, but they were coming at it from the perspective of, well, we'd like to see something in there so that parents who have minors playing a game can control how long their kids are playing the game. And I was like, okay, let's take a step back because I understand where you guys are coming at or where you guys are coming from, excuse me, with your discussion because they're looking at the Fortnite kids who play 12 hours a day and
Yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
don't want their kids playing video games for 12 hours a day and I'm coming at it from the perspective of, well, I want people playing my game for long periods of time. It needs to be up to the individual how long that time is, but to justify a monthly subscription, there needs to be a significant amount of time invested into the video game. And we're not necessarily talking 12-hour chunks, but 15
But sometimes it happens.
I
Sometimes you just have one weekend
yeah,
during this month
I'm
and you're
sick. I
like,
have the
oh,
flu.
I'm going full into
Yeah,
it.
I have the
That,
flu. It's a Saturday. I got nothing else to do. There's lots of reasons why I might
yeah.
want to play for 12 hours. So kicking someone out for playing for, first of all, what's too long? Who determines what's too long?
Yeah.
What's too long for one
What you could
person
do,
might not be too long for another.
and I wonder if there was not a game doing that. I think I've seen that for a game. You have played for
No,
2 hours.
EverQuest
Maybe
2
take a break.
EverQuest 2 and even EverQuest 1, I think they have a pop-up window when you first come in, and you
Yeah.
can actually set a timer to go
Oh,
off. So you can have it, you can set the time limit and everything, and then once you've been playing for so long, it'll pop up on the screen and it'll notify you, hey, you've been playing for 3 hours. Maybe you ought to think about taking a break right now. I think that's as far as I would be willing to go
yeah. I agree with
to,
that.
because I'm not going to tell
Free will
someone,
is important.
yeah, it's very important to have the freedom to do what you want, but also to design your game in such a way that it's not, you know, we're not using microtransactions, so we're already kind of trying to steer away from that
Mhm.
dopamine hit. But when I think about the type of people who traditionally have played subscription-based games, think about it this way: this whole gaming addiction um, sort of disorder didn't really start to become an issue until the last decade. And the last decade is when we have seen the rise of free to play titles, mobile titles, tablet titles, lots of different consoles, lots of free to play.
I
Before
think
that, you didn't have all of those issues because there wasn't a prevalence of people playing games.
I think that it started with World of Warcraft.
Probably.
It's a reason why it was called World of Warcraft.
Well,
And
that's
I
we
know,
also called EverQuest, Evercrack. I mean,
yeah, that there's so many people that has dropped off school, that has stopped their job. Well, I know a lot of example of not horror story, but close to horror story. I've seen some people. I've seen it in my own life, but I think I was still regulated because I had children and I had a job. So of course that compensated and keep me in line, so to speak. But people that were out of line, I've seen them, really dropping things. I've seen them gaining 10 kilos because they were starting to just game. I see them having physical evidence of their gaming addiction. And World of Warcraft has been, I think, for a lot of people, I've read an article about that. It was a revelation because until then, it was not that obvious that this could happen and that you could really be out of touch with reality so much. Like if it's the same if you were on drugs or on alcohol, you're just like, oh yes, I need to do my dailies, and oh, and we have killed Ragnaros and blah blah. Blah. You
yeah,
say
I've heard stories of people in all MMORPGs, especially in the early days. There was the story of like the kid who his account got hacked, and he had four years of time put into the character. Somebody hacked his account and deleted it, and he had all this epic gear and everything else. And the kid goes out and commits suicide. Or jumps off a building. That happened in China. There's examples of that. They're extremely rare, like one in 3 million. But these are also examples of people who, this is the important thing, people who were already emotionally unstable to begin with. So you can't blame the video game for those issues.
no, of
However,
course
it
not.
definitely contributed to allowing them a way to compensate for whatever bad was going on in their life. And then when that got taken away too, it just broke, something snapped. But, I think about as much time as I put into EverQuest 1, which was like 7 years. At no point in time would I have, physically harmed myself if my account got hacked. I would have been extremely pissed, and probably not played for a couple months, or something like that. But there's no way that I would ever have done something to
No.
harm myself over an item that I know is just digital. It's just pixels on a screen at the end of the day.
But yeah, like again, we cannot judge. For some people, it's all their
Yeah,
life at some point. And it's true. It's not a video game that creates addiction. It's just another potential terrain, and there's stuff that are more used to for being addicted. But if you remove it, the person that needed addiction, because like we explained earlier, it's a compensation, so it's a natural behaviors, and we are all doing it all the time. If it's not with video game, it will be
there's
with
something
something
else.
else. So what's important, I think, as developers, industry managers, whatever, is to not take advantage of the addictive um, features that a video game can do. Of course, you want people to come back to your game and playing as much as possible, because that's what you want to do when you create a video game and you want to earn money with it. But there's a limit to have, I think, which is a moral, ethical limit. I do really believe that people that are responsible of creating media, maybe movie, music, or video game, they have a responsibility towards humanity, and they need to think about it when they're creating their things and taking advantage of addictive behaviors with those
I
microtransactions
don't
or
know
the
what you're
daily
talking about.
system or a reward system or
The only
whatever.
reason I got into game development was to make millions of dollars. So, calm yourself.
I'm sorry, I'm judging you right now. Look at my face.
I think it's just yeah, it's definitely on the developers. I think that's one of the things that we've tried really hard from our standpoint. Try to focus on just creating a good game that's fun so people want to play it as opposed to devising scammy mechanics to make people play your game or to deceive them into playing your game more frequently. There's nothing wrong with being smart about marketing tactics because I've been in the
Mm-hmm.
marketing world for a decade, more than a decade now. But there is ethical marketing, and then there's scum of the earth marketing,
Yeah.
and we're trying to avoid all the scummy stuff. So we'll hopefully be able to achieve what we want to achieve. You never know. I mean, we may have to, go that cash route shop down the road. Hate to say it,
Yeah.
but no. I mean, we're really trying hard. That would be one of those things where I've said openly that I would prefer to shut down the studio than to go to a free to play microtransaction um, model. But at the same time, when I've got 15, 20 people and their families depending on me for a salary, that's a selfish statement to make, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not quite that simple. It's, you know, the, as a
Yeah.
business owner, I have a responsibility to my employees first and foremost, and to my business partners and their wives and kids and husbands and kids, and so we have to look at that and go, there are examples of companies that are doing it in a very good way. I think like Path of Exile um, is doing a very good version of a free to play game. Um, Elder Scrolls Online, for better or for worse, I think has one of the better sort of cash shop markets. It still has its controversies, but
Yeah.
it's not as bad as,
It's
say,
correct.
it's not like a mobile game where it's obviously set up to like
Uh,
manipulate you into spending lots of, like, Black Desert Online. I still have the mobile version on my phone. I've had it for about 3 weeks now. It is the most manipulative piece of shit I've ever played. I will not spend a dime on it. I will not. But it's literally like I play that game when I'm sitting on the toilet, and it's like as soon as you get into play, they just start spamming you with all of these offers and
Shame.
reasons that you should want to buy something from the cash shop, and it's like a nonstop barrage of
It's harassing. It's
it's
harassment.
harassing. It's harassing me to use their cash shop, and it's like,
And
just
then
let
all you
me.
want to do is, I'm installing this stupid app.
Yeah, so I mean, it is. I have uninstalled games in the past, like I talked about Neverwinter on the PS4. I uninstalled that game because of how invasive their
Mm,
microtransactions were. Anyway, we're getting off topic now. So to wrap things up, have you ever been addicted to a game? And think about this critically. Don't think of it from a defensive standpoint.
yeah.
Those of you who are watching or listening, because
And
I've been there.
I will do it. Hi, everyone. I'm Eloa. I've been addicted to World of Warcraft for 6 years and to video game and internet for at least 15 years. Now I feel better.
I was addicted. I am now a hobbyist enthusiast, and thankfully, I have a wife who keeps me from being addicted. Because otherwise, I probably would be addicted. Anyway,
Hail to Chris!
yeah, thank you, Chris. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on this subject. It is a controversial, there's obviously still a lot of research that has to be done, even though one international organization has classified gaming addiction as real. There is a lot of debate within the industry about whether or not that is a valid um, uh, um, analysis, considering that there's so much that can go into that and so many different things to look at, and there's not been enough research done into whether or not it truly is the fault of the video game per se, or the person. So let us know your thoughts, etc., in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you like what you hear. Hit the bell button to get updates. Go over to Patreon if you want the podcast version. Of course, please support us over there as well. We'd love your support over at Patreon. You can follow all the links to Elois stuff in the description text below. And we will see you next week for whatever we talk about next week, which I think will be guild management, probably. We'll see. Until next time. You're muted, by the way.
Oh, be kind to yourself. Take care. Goodbye. Hi.